starting 2023 off with a bang. And why don't we call the meeting to order at 4:03 p.m. And the first action item is approval of minutes from the December 15th meeting. And anybody have anybody have any comments or corrections to the minutes as they were issued? Okay, can you speak it?
I'd just like to make an addition or comment. It doesn't have to be added, but it's Jim David was the spearhead behind that pond and getting it renovated, and I just wanted to give him credit.
Okay. Any other amendments, additions, and or corrections? No? Okay, now can I get a motion to approve the minutes? No, you move, not approve.
I move.
Okay.
I move that we approve the minutes
There we go.
for the December meeting.
Can I get a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. And again, Marion, thank you for that. They were fantastic. Okay, well, now we're in item 3, public participation. Here we go. Public participation enables the public to address the commission about an item that is not on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission, please state your name and address for the record. The Arizona open meeting law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on an item which is not listed on the prepared agenda. The commission members may, however, respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. Public comments should be limited to 3 minutes reading time. So do we have any public participation today? Online? Here in the venue? No. Okay, great. So we'll close that out and move on to item 4, new business. I will make a note that item 4B is going to be deferred a month at least. The folks at Pine Canyon Lily were digging out and they couldn't get the rest of the presentation done, so they gave me a call. So we'll see them in February, which is great. And so we can move into 4A, stormwater funding update with Ed Shane. Thanks, Ed. Ed, I had a quick question on that. I was trying to figure out, of the green box, if we get grants, how much money do you estimate has to be matched that ends up in the rate increase? It was like 50 million, 2 million, 10 million? What's the bogey? Okay, we match. Okay, because I got another question later, but, okay.
No, I always open a can of worms, so before I open the can. Okay. Um, so this is a tangent, but it's an important one, right? And it's something we've talked about at previous meetings. So there's two problems that we're trying to solve here with capital improvement, stormwater, right? First problem is how do you fund the necessary operations, right? Where do you get the money from? How do we plan how to get that money? You're doing a great job at that planning process, and so thank you. Um, Although I do want to refresh for the record my lingering concern, which is, you know, what if we end up with a lot more surprise stormwater costs? And to what extent and in what way can we build in those contingencies, right? I think we might want to plan for surprises at this point because we've had a lot of them lately. So that's one problem we're trying to solve. The other problem we're trying to solve is not the problem of how you fund our stormwater operations. It's the problem of how we change our community, its physical structure, but also its behavior, the behavior of people in this community, the way we plan, the way we build, the way we act in the forest, all of these things, we want to change those behaviors in a way that makes our stormwater operations more efficient, lower costs, more resilient over the long term, right? So we want to do both of these things. And so it behooves us to consider um, whether and how we can use our capital improvement plan, and especially the way we fund the capital improvement plan, who we charge in order to push behavior in the right direction. So a good question that we need to be asking ourselves is, um, what is it that's under our control as a community that is causing our stormwater costs and problems to be higher? And what is it that we can do in terms of charging money or structuring fees that will bring those costs down in the areas that we can control, right? Um, and then we would want to ask, are we actually getting that done? Are we charging the right people the right amount of money to do the right things, so that will actually modify their behavior? So for example, just a couple tangible examples for those who don't talk in riddles like I do. Um, Walmart, we start charging them $1,000 a month for stormwater fees. And then later it becomes $10,000 a month. Do we know at what point in time Walmart looks at that number and starts to say, I would really like to change my behavior to bring this number down because that's too much money now. And what would they do, right? And when they did that thing, would it actually help our stormwater problems, right? So if I was Walmart, at some point, I'm going to start saying, well, I'm going to dig up that parking lot and I'm going to put in a bunch of stormwater retention, a bunch of porous pavement. I'm going to put in bigger retention basins. I'm going to put in water storage under my parking lot. Might cost me $500,000, but I can bring down my ERUs by doing that. And at some point that makes sense. And then we will have successfully modified behavior, right? But if they do that, will that actually help any of our problems? I would argue that it probably doesn't in our case help our problems that much. So is that the modification we want? If not, how can we change how much we're charging and who we're charging it to so that we'll actually incentivize improvements in our stormwater picture over time? Right? We got to start thinking about incentives. And I'm not convinced that those things are aligned. And I think we should talk about it. Maybe not today. We don't have to solve that problem right now, but it's something that we should talk about. Becomes more important over time. Those incentives add up, right?
John, go ahead.
So I have two questions. First of all, I read in the paper a few days ago or heard on the news somehow that Coconino County got $90 million for flood remediation. Is that correct? And so will that help the remediation on the peaks at all, or what's the plan for that money? Second question is, I don't know if this is stormwater or general city stuff, but I've been harping about forest management, especially the management on the peaks. And if Flagstaff can do the same thing that Williams has done with Bill Williams Mountain, that area on the north side of Bill Williams Mountain is restricted to camping and motorized vehicles and no campfires. And if you haven't seen it, it just came out, there was an article that Forest Service just put this out a few days ago that changes management policy, thank God, or proposes. It's a proposal. It hasn't actually changed it yet. And then this came out in the paper on January 12th. So, you know, my big worry is if there's a real big fire that does a lot of damage on the southwest side of the peaks, there's nothing really you can do to prevent what's going to happen. To be honest, it will be too late at that point. So I think the city needs a coordinated effort to support this proposal, which is not perfect. And there are other, you know, negative implications like what happens to the homeless, which I'm very sensitive to, and I'm sure all of us are. But I think this commission should decide if we're going to have a letter of support for that proposal and maybe just discuss it briefly, because prevention is worth you know, $10 million of cure or $100 million of cure. So just a one little bit of information. You know, I talked to several people in the Forest Service over the past month trying to get information. And the first thing I was amazed by is they don't keep statistics on what types of man-caused fires there are, which I was a little shocked by. Maybe they do, but they don't want to let them out. I'm not sure. But then in this article, the Go Lightly article in the paper, he said that 98% of all fires are within a stone's throw of a motorized vehicle, which I was a little surprised by.
Yes, go ahead.
Clarification on that. I don't remember the exact percentages are, but in the Coconino National Forest, the majority of fires are caused by lightning. It's quite rare. Nearly every place else in the United States, human-caused wildfires dominate. But here, lightning-caused wildfires dominate due to quirk of the terrain and the weather. Yeah, and that statistic, 98%, it refers to human-caused wildfires. So nearly all human-caused wildfires, almost all of them happen in a place where someone can drive.
Go ahead, Malcolm.
Yeah, Ed, clarification or maybe some numbers would help me. And I realize that there's some of the debt services paying for a lot of the most important projects, the Rio de Flag I see. But capital money, so under the scenarios, existing capital funding and then the proposed capital funding, like 1 million goes to 5 million. Do you know what some of those numbers might be? Because that could be a question they ask, right? How much money do you have now for capital and how much will you have for capital under these scenarios? Okay, well, it might be, I don't know if anybody's asked that question or not, but in my mind, it's like, hey, I'm getting 600,000 now. I realize the debt service complicates it, but our capital is going to go to, without debt service, it's going to go to 2 million. It's going to go to, those kinds of things might, for me to get my mind around it, it's kind of interesting. So what about a little devil's advocate thing where the debt service is paying for the Rio to Flag and it's paying for some other really important stuff. Why do you need so much money? I mean, here's another thought. I mean, kind of step on that a little bit. If the Rio to Flag is done, if you get your Rio to Flag is done, these debt service projects in orangish color on this anyway, are done, and you get a big rate increase, won't you have money after 5 years? This is all over 5 years, right? So we get the Rio to Flag done, we get all these important projects done, then year 6 comes, you've got a big rate increase, you've got $3 million extra for capital. Now you can go down and do these projects. Is there any validity to that viewpoint?
Well, so Malcolm, there's people that would tell you that that is exactly what they don't want to have happen, that once these rates go up, they never come back down, and they want to sunset this after 5 years because we know how this go, their words, not mine. We know how this goes. We bump it now and then we're going to bump it later because these things always fund themselves and they meander and grow.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. And
yeah.
so I'm thinking that we get all this stuff done in 5 years. All right, we're done.
Yes.
Now, granted, there will be more problems that show up. I'm sure of that. But so just a little bit of thought there, because if you get the Rio to Flag done in 5 years, I mean, wow, that's the biggest accomplishment your section has ever pulled off. Okay, trust me on that. And so I'm just All right, just. So is council talking about
Well, that-
revisiting the rate in 5 years?
This is, put a pin in that for 1 second. Ed, can you go to the slide that had the three options? With the color code? Yeah, that's good, that's good. So you all didn't get to see Ed present this morning to the Chamber of Commerce and the reaction thereof, which was interesting and fun. But very valid concerns. And it made me think about a couple of things, which are, first off, I think the list in the basic CIP is a must-do list. And what we asked you all to do is go away and tell us what's the base, bare bones, and then what can we layer on top of that. And you've done that. You've done a great job of it. I think the middle list represents things that probably need to be done. And the question, I think, for all of us to think through and sort of demand from the city council as a commission is a separation of the use of funds versus the source of funds. And by what I mean by that is, we should probably say, we agree that there should be a rate increase for the bare bones. Absolutely. But, or let me back that up. We should probably say we need more money for the bare bones. But is that a rate increase, or is that the city taking a hard look at its budget, saying, where were we in terms of community resiliency? Who had that number? We were like, okay.
Yeah, we're bottom, about
So
5%.
there's a big concern in Flagstaff about resiliency and how do we keep this community moving forward? And if we're in the worst 5%, maybe some funds should go from other programs that don't have the impact this does into this, so the rate hike on our citizens isn't so high. And this is what we've been asking Miranda to take, and they're in budget meetings right now, and I mentioned that to Brad. So we need to do this on the left. Question is, where's the money come from? I think it should come from part of the city budget, not from our citizens. And so I personally am going to make a recommendation to that, and I would urge my fellow commissioners to join me in that, and I'll send it to everybody, and you could say, no, get away from me, you're crazy. But I think that's something. The second part is in that second column, most of those initiatives in green, again, I think where I heard the business community straining is, we're going to put a bunch of money in case we get a grant. Why isn't it that if the grant is important, again, we would move things out of the general budget to fund these versus other things? So instead of putting up more bike lane test projects, we move it to this because this is actually going to help the community have a bigger impact. So I think that dynamic is one that we really have to really put our voice behind to the city council as a group. I think what you've done is great, and we'll see what package, right? But that's the spend. Where's the source, right? Second piece is the county part of this is we need to get better aligned with the county on their planning, because there was a great point brought up this morning. Well, we're doing all this, but if the county does all this other stuff, will the detention centers never get full and then we won't need to empty them? I think that's a little wishful thinking. But it's like, okay, but how does the system work is kind of what I heard. And so how do we talked about, and I think after this, I'd like to solicit my fellow commissioners on who would like to be on the tag team to be, with the city council, trying to coordinate with the county on our planning, on reaction planning, but also how we get a chance to prioritize what's being spent so that Flagstaff gets a fair share, if not the biggest share of impact, right? Because we've got $5 million other dollars leaving here to go to the county besides the money they're getting on top. So we want to be a big part of that. So I think, and the other part is use with the county. So we need to coordinate with the county, with the Forest Service on the use, because it's also part of their stuff. So I would suggest that for the commission that we put together a list of, we think the water department has done a fantastic job on how we can do this, but we urge / beg / demand that you come back and tell us where in the budget can we fund this instead of a rate? How do we get with the county and make sure they're optimizing? How do we get the use in some of the forest around here revised so we're not getting slammed in 2 years? And all of this is irrelevant because it's a 10 times the spend. And so that's not your job, that's our job, I think. At least I'll take a shot at it. But I think we need to take that voice to the city council and put that on their plate. And I welcome comments from my colleagues, and Brad and Ed.
Yeah, just to add a little history to point number one, city budget, general fund, and trying to fund stormwater projects out of that. Just going to give you a little background that the Rio de Flag was originally going to be funded from the general fund. As time went on, and I can't attest to the culture now, but since stormwater has their own pot of money, everyone wants into it. And so if somebody's doing a project, and by the way, I don't know what the downtown mile is and why you're paying 2 million for it, but I don't know if that's an example or not. But anyway, so if any project has any stormwater infrastructure in it whatsoever, people are after that pot. So number one, that's your number one. I agree with you. We're gonna need a lot of luck on that one.
And you gotta, and I think it's a prioritization point to the city council. They've got to think this, this is core infrastructure. This and the wastewater problem we're going to tackle. It doesn't get any more core than this. In my mind, it could maybe power, right? But yeah, good.
Yeah, so I guess I have a couple thoughts. I agree with where you're going with that. I think there's, like, I like the prioritization and the scenarios, and agree with the general fact that there needs to be, I mean, these things have to be maintained. The basins have to be maintained. We don't have an idea of, I mean, the O&M costs from a couple years ago have gone way up to where they are now with the fires that we've had. So, so there's these external forces on the city stormwater system that are really out of your control and unknown until something else happens. And in the way I kind of look at this, you know, even with different systems we have in the water or sewer, the pretty closed systems, stormwater is different in that it's open, and when a stormwater facility does not function properly, it affects your emergency services, it affects transportation, it affects all these different things. And so we're seeing the repair and the maintenance all in the stormwater department. You know, you have to kick the fees up quite a lot. So if there is a way that that can be handled more, the general fund, I don't know how all the ins and outs of that work. I think that would probably be maybe it would take some pressure off the stormwater department to increase the rate. But yes, I agree with where you're going with that.
Any other thoughts? We've got other things we do need to get to, but I
Just-
again, okay, so go ahead, John.
Just real quick, the ERU, and I have to confess, I haven't searched my water bill for this. Is that in the water bill?
Yeah.
Okay. And you've done and you said you're going to put an insert in the water bill explaining how that all works, or already have?
I'll let Lisa probably answer what the water bill insert looks like, because that's.
I'm just saying that you know, like you were talking about education, that's going to really be important for people to understand this and what they can do to mitigate, lower their bill. Not that it's really going to affect what's happening to us. But
Lisa Deem, Management Analyst. We did send out an insert in all of the mailed water bills. There was a notice that was put in the electronic, and there's also a little message in the electronic on the rates, directing them to the website and to what, well, it will be this presentation and the little info sheet. So that has gone to every customer. There was also an email blast sent to every business license owners. That includes HOAs, that's anyone that has a business license within the city that would be receiving bills and the municipal utility bill, inviting them, telling them about the rate adoption, inviting their comments. There's an email address, Flagwater, that they can send comments. I've received 3 so far. And asking and offering to discuss it with them. So we got response from the chamber. I've gotten a couple of responses, but no one yet has really asked to meet with us to talk about the rates. So it's gone out. We've done NAU ad spots. We put rat cards at the library and all of our public places. So most people, we hope, are aware of it. But yes, it is in the utility bill.
And the max ERU is going up still, right? Past 5?
Yeah,
yeah,
actually,
okay.
I'll
No, don't
make
worry
sure
about
that
it, but
that's
just-
not, we gotta make sure that's in the
Yeah.
presentation. I don't
Yeah,
know if it is
yeah,
or
yeah.
not, but yeah, hoping to get
So-
that residential up to 10.
Is the net of this, we're going to vote on this issue tonight or sometime in the future?
This is
What's the deal?
informational for us, and ultimately the vote goes to the city council. But that's why I was thinking, I think we need to give a strong guidance, though, to the city council of what we all think. And I'm happy to take a shot at putting the draft points together and circulate it to everybody. And
Yeah.
you can, and I have no pride of authorship. So hack at it. And
Mr. Chairman, so you would propose then to, so I understand, to draft up and send it around to us? The 2 points of look at the general fund to help out, not exact language, of course, and the county funding. Is that the two?
That's basically, yeah, we'll have some sub points on those, but it's sort of that, right? And look and coordinate better with the county, not only on operations, but on some of these things that are preventative, right? So, including use. forest
So,
use.
so at the Chamber of Commerce meeting, they would support scenario 1, the bare minimum? Is that what they,
No,
no, they wouldn't even support any of
no,
the 3?
The big pushback, or the concern is you're gonna raise the rate, it's never gonna come down. So they really thought we should have a sunset in here to, back to Malcolm's point. So at year 4 or 5, it's automatically in the movement that it drops back down, which from a commercial business standpoint, you zero base your budget every year. That's a natural thing, right? So that makes sense that they said that. And the other concern was just, why is the city council not looking at other parts of the budget to fund this instead of just throwing on the backs of the taxpayer and business? Which is, I think, resonates. So I think it's something we got to raise. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So I'll take that action. Yeah. Right. Right. I mean, even in the green box, it's, let's support option 1. And as things come up, or it's, let's do the rate increase for option 1. But if, as green things come up, that comes out of the general fund, and because it's a bake off between what's more important, this or A or B, tell us. And then if you think this is important, we go after it. If you think something else is important, then we don't. But yeah, they've got to make some decisions. Go ahead, Ben.
So my request for that draft is that we mention 2 specific points, right? In addition to the one you raised. I mean, along the lines of who pays. So we've got an apportionment question. How should these things be apportioned? Right now, the apportionment is based on the ERU formula with an unpredictable mix of grants, reducing and offsetting that. But regardless of what gets funded by grants, the apportionment is to residents and businesses based on ERUs, is my understanding. Is that correct? That's correct, right? So that's the default apportionment. And that apportionment might be deeply problematic already, but no one has cared so much about it in the past when those fees were very low. Once those fees get very large, the apportionment starts becoming a big problem. So this is an apportionment question, right? So that might not be the right apportionment, and that really needs to be brought to the council's attention, right? If we're using ERUs, the fees get thrown at retail stores and restaurants, and big box stores disproportionately, and also at residents. Um, you have many other apportionments possible, but those are all under the purview of council, right? We could apportion some of that to sales taxes or to other types of taxes, other types of fees. And so that needs to be considered, right?
Well, I'll be careful with that. You can add in new ways of funding stormwater. That's fine. But if you're going to change the ERU, this is no longer can't talk.
no
This is
longer
no
a rate
longer a
change.
stormwater rate adjustment.
Right.
This would then be a stormwater rate study, and that takes over a year because that's a whole legal proceeding besides just council decision.
Right. I think what we can do at the end is conclude that we want to examine just that is over time. I mean, we got to make a decision now about this to get the tractors, the tractors need to start digging in. But how do we over time maybe move to a different model, which is to your point, is more based on impact.
And there are several models out there other than ERUs. They have their pros and cons, each one of them.
Yeah.
And it'd be exciting to explore those. I just want to caution that trying to change the model right now we just don't have the time for that. So yeah, thank you, Kurt.
Okay, thanks all. All right, let's move on to item 4C, consideration of Water Service Division fiscal year 24 CIP plan. Mr. Gary Miller.
Thought I'd have a little bit of a break. I thought there was another item. That's okay. Right.
Yeah, they're going to defer till next month.
Come on. There it goes. All right. Well, good evening, Commission. My name's Gary Miller. I'm the Water Services Engineering Section Director. Formalities out of the way. Before you today, I have the Capital Improvements Program for fiscal year 24. As I go through this presentation, I am not going to touch on every single project. I gave you a list of all of those projects. If I miss one or skip over one that you have particular interest in, feel free to ask questions about it. But don't have the time to go through all of them, and so I'm going to try and hit the highlights as best I can. The first thing I wanted to talk about was how we develop our capital plan. One of the first things we look at are our planning documents, a few of which are listed here. We have the water master plan, the sewer master plan, the biosolids master plan that was completed a couple of years ago. And then for stormwater, Ed referenced this earlier, the Northeast Area Master Drainage Study. And the water and sewer master plans are a little old. Those are over 6-7 years old. We're working right now to update the water master plan. We have budget to update the sewer master plan, but unfortunately are lacking the resources to get that moving forward. So we're doing our best, but we're trying to update those plans. Second, we meet with staff, the operations staff, to see what their priorities are and what they're seeing in the field. And then we adjust those plans or that plan based on our revenue projections. This plan that I'm showing you today does not have the benefit of those revenue projections. So this is really the ideal capital plan, and some of these projects may be cut out as a result of that. Some of the challenges we faced with some of our projects, I'm sure all of you have heard about or are aware of the supply chain issues. For just our pipeline projects, we're seeing up to 6 months of lead time for just pipe. For some of our plant projects like the Rio digesters and Wildcat digesters, which are in the future, we're seeing over a year on lead time on some of that equipment. So it's having a significant impact on our schedules and keeping those projects moving forward. In addition to that, we have some cost inflation and then the need for the revenues to keep pace with the actual needs. And as I mentioned previously, some project management resources. Right now, our capital improvement program, capital improvement section is pretty tapped out with the projects they have, and Water Services has several capital projects coming forward that we're going to be challenged to deliver with the resources we have right now. So we'll start with the water capital plan. As you can see, over the next 5 years, we're averaging about $15 million a year in terms of the identified need for projects. I starred some of those projects listed on the left-hand side, and I'm going to touch on the ones that are starred, I believe. I forgot to edit that part of the presentation. My apologies. The one at the bottom, the Interbasin Waterline Road, I'm not going to touch on that. There's a separate presentation. So the first item on the list was the Rio de Flag stormwater waterline relocations. So this is all of the waterline projects that would need to be relocated in association with the Rio de Flag project. And we set aside $400,000 a year for that project or for those costs. A lot of which don't get spent year after year, but they get set aside for when the Rio is going to get built. Then we have the annual waterline replacement projects. And I'll bring those check marks up. So this is what we've accomplished over the last, I'm going to say 5 to 6 years. The map you see on the right is the map in our water master plan, which identified all of the critical infrastructure replacements in the city of Flagstaff. So all those check marks represent projects that have been completed, and a few on this map are talked about here in future slides. So our annual waterline replacement, right now we have Coconino Estates waterline replacement going on. Huntington Waterline just got finished just this in the last couple months, and then Phoenix Avenue got completed a couple, let's see, that got finished last summer. And so you can see pictures of each of those projects on the right-hand side. All right, one of the biggest or highest priority projects for water distribution is the Schweitzer Canyon transmission line. We've completed phases 1 through 3. That's the dashed line you see on the right-hand side of that map. Phases 4 and 5 are represented by that dark blue line. For phase 4, the cost of that project, when I was updating these numbers from last year's presentation, these numbers have almost doubled in price based on engineers' estimates that we've gotten most recently. This is one project that we're faced with long lead times. This project probably won't get started with construction until November, just because it still has to go through procurement and just the lead times on materials. It's going to take some time. And then phase 5 is currently estimated at $6.5 million. As we wrap up construction of phase 4, we're going to move right into phase 5. Every year we set aside money for our annual water vault replacement. So these are vaults for meters and other infrastructure that we have. The meters are particularly important because they give us accurate data for billing information. And so we have a list of large meters that we're trying to replace. Cameo Mobile Home Park is the one we're working on this year. We've got a contractor selected. Again, prices went up and we're hopeful to get that move in a couple of months. Next on the list would be NAU getting their meter vaults replaced. New wells and pump houses. Last year we completed the Fort Tuthill well number 2. In order to take advantage of the water that well can produce, we need to build a well house for that well. We're actually looking at combining well house 1 with the well house needs for number 2, and potentially doing some additional working of Fort Tuthill well number 1 in hopes of recognizing some additional capacity out of that well as well. And so that project, the annual budget for the well replacements or for additional wells is $2 million a year. Typically, that's programmed for $2 million to drill a well, and then the following year, we would construct a well house. We recognize these potential benefits out of Fort Tuthill well number 1, so we took funds and said, hey, I think we can recognize the benefits of an additional well in what we already have and trying to take advantage of those resources with the combining of the well house at Fort Tuthill. Lake Mary Water Treatment Plant Sedimentation Basin. So at the Lake Mary Water Treatment Plant, we have equipment that's been well overdue for replacement and repair, assets that are over 60 years old. This last year was slated for an EI grant, and that EI grant did get approved, although the funding for it hasn't been authorized for the city yet. However, this is a very high priority project for the city of Flagstaff, especially considering that some of our other water resources are compromised at the moment, that being the interbasin. So we've made the decision to move forward with this project without that EI grant funding, and that total project cost is $6.5 million. There was one other point, and
Gary, if we get the funding, then can you still go get the funding even if we're moving out on it?
if we are under construction, then we would not qualify for the funding any longer. Lake Mary Raw Water Pipeline. This was identified in our budgets or in our 5-year plan last year, but they were a little further out. This is another critical piece of infrastructure for utilizing Lake Mary. We had a pipeline failure here. Brian, when was that? That was in fall of 2020. And I want to say we had like 5 or 7 breaks in 10 years. So okay. So that's a lot of failures on a single stretch of pipeline. And so we've set aside money for assessment next year to look at what should be the highest priority for replacement of those lines. And then we've got dollars budgeted for replacement in following years. Wastewater. Again, this is a proposed budget. And as you can see, we've got some pretty significant expenditures, on average about $23 million, $24 million a year for the next 4 years. And the list of projects, I believe I'm going to touch on all of these projects except for the energy efficiency program and the reserves at the bottom of that list. The rest of these I should touch on here in future slides. So the annual sewer line replacement, in our sewer master plan, it was identified that we should be replacing 1 mile per year, which equates to about $1.8 million. That's been in our annual budget in years past. A lot of that money has been, I'll say, swept in to be used for higher priority projects in our wastewater treatment. There is a project pertaining to sewer line replacement projects that I do see as a high priority, so it's on the request, and it's one that I lose sleep at night over, and I'll get to that in a minute. The one project we do have money set aside for is Grandview sewer relocations. And the reason this is on the list is because it's part of the general obligation bond. Grandview is going to see an inverted crown as part of the flood mitigation. And in order to achieve those designs, we're going to have to do some utility relocations along Grandview, which are currently identified as being funded through the general obligation bond. So this is the project I referred to earlier that I lose sleep over. This is our interceptor that feeds into the Wildcat treatment plant. This is the biggest sewer line that we have in the city of Flagstaff. Oh, I should have looked up the age of this line. I want to say this line was built in it wasn't the 60s. It could have been the 60s. It's a 33-inch line. It's our main interceptor to collect all of that flow. It was one of the highest priorities identified in the 2015 sewer master plan. And one of the things that I've been seeing recently when we sign permits is that we are approaching our permitted capacity. This is a pretty significant project in that we have two significant crossings, one under I-40 and one under BNSF Railroad. We're actually working on some plans right now to fix some utility conflicts associated with a future BNSF widening project. If there's any opportunity to take advantage of that project and plan for the future, we will, but that's pretty difficult to do when we don't have designs for the rest of the alignment.
So Gary, when you hit your permitted capacity, does that mean construction stops for new housing? Because there's just not enough pipe to put down the system?
The engineer side of me wants to say yes. The political side of me wants to say, no, we'll figure out a way to handle that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so it's a paper commitment, not an actual wet water issue. So I think that's why he was struggling to answer that. I think that's the simplest way to share that.
I will say that, when we do ADQ permitting, they base their flows off of this paper commitment. Like, we're required to utilize this calculation for flows based on population. In the sewer master plan, I did find that back in 2015, there were instances during high flows. This is a result of infiltration during monsoon seasons or spring snowmelt seasons when we see high flows in there. We do have some of those manholes that are surcharging, not overflowing, but there's actually pressure flow occurring in these lines at times. So it, again, just reinforcing the priority. Oh, and back to that previous project. So we have money budgeted, I want to say it was $300,000 set aside for assessments and design to start next year with plans to upsize that in the future. Rio to Flag sewer line relocations. This is similar to the water line relocations that I identified earlier, but just for sewer. In many of the situations that we have with the Rio to Flag, we actually might need some lift stations to get around some of those low spots where the Rio to Flag crosses. Again, it's a set aside, and we'll utilize those funds once the Rio to Flag project moves forward. Wildcat cogen equipment. So this was a project identified in the general obligation bond. This takes digester gas or gas that's created during the solids digestion process. And currently we flare that gas off, but it can be put to good use to power portions of our treatment processes. So it's an alternative energy source, and it can reduce our carbon footprint, and it supports some of the council goals. This project, I believe, is mostly designed, and we're working forward towards construction of this at Wildcat. So now I'm going to hit on a few of the projects identified in the biosolids master plan. One of the top recommendations was a flow diversion. So this is speaking to the capacity, the treatment capacity discussions that we've had in the past. That flow diversion was intended to give us some breathing room or some time to get some improvements made at Wildcat. After further analysis last year, we identified that flow diversion probably wasn't the best option, and we've replaced that with putting in some digesters out at the Rio plant, as well as some dewatering. Last year, we had an estimate of $12 million in the budget, and our current estimate is $24 million. So in addition to that, we're moving forward with digester design out at Wildcat. Had a meeting with Carollo earlier today on that project. And that design is moving forward. Oh, on the Rio digesters, we actually just got 60% plans for that this week. And we will be working on the CM at risk request for proposal momentarily, hoping to get that moving forward soon. Want to get a contractor on board as soon as possible because we have a deadline to meet of summer of 24 to get that project completed. Let's see, equipment upgrades, maintenance and replacement needs at Wildcat. A lot of those were identified in the general obligation bond, which I have listed after this. The mechanical dewatering facility at Wildcat is also another project. And then the solar drying facility at Wildcat is one of those projects in out years. So Rio digesters, I probably hit on most of the details of the biosolids projects. We've got the Rio digester project, again, $24 million. The Wildcat digester project estimated at $16 million. The Wildcat digester project, right now we're only looking at one digester. Originally, we were looking at two, but with the Rio project, we were able to reduce the scope of that project. On the right-hand side, you'll see a map or a site plan of our plans. This came from the 30% plans that were submitted to us about 2 months ago. And you can see in the lower left-hand corner of the Rio facility, we have those two digesters planned. And I don't need to go through the justification. I think everyone here is familiar with why we're moving forward with those projects. Mechanical dewatering at Wildcat. So right now, the way we dewater at Wildcat is the SSB, solid settling basins, and geobags. The geobags were have been in place for 7 or 8 years. 2014.
2014, 2015 as a temporary
Yeah,
solution.
I was getting there. So those were put in place for dewatering at Wildcat as a temporary measure. And the projects identified here would utilize, one of the pieces of equipment, we haven't gotten into design yet, to replace the need for the geobags and potentially the SSBs as well, the solid settling basins. And that's pretty much the justification. Is the SSBs are in dire need of maintenance, to the point that I don't want to say they're failing, but they're not functioning at their peak capacity right now. And then finally, we have solar drying for our solids out at Wildcat. This process would allow us to get to I think it's a class A solid, right? It just, with a class A solid, that gives us more options as to what we can do with our solids. Currently, we land apply all of our solids at our dedicated land disposal site at Wildcat. And rather than disposing just there, this would give us more options. And it's economical, low energy to get that class A biosolids. We've been meaning to do a tour down in Surprise, and we haven't set that up yet, but this project is budgeted several years out, in 27. The Wildcat Primary Pump Station, commonly referred to as PEPS. This was identified in the general obligation bond. This is probably at 90% design, and again, one of those projects we're working to move forward to construction. It helps with so when we put in IFAS, that wasn't well, PEPS wasn't designed for IFAS. So the pump station that we're utilizing right now doesn't operate at prime efficiency to serve IFAS. So plus we have no redundancy in PEPS right now. If one of those pumps goes out, we do lack some redundancy there. So this will create that redundancy and create better efficiency at Wildcat. Electrical upgrades. This was a request we did make in the bond request, but it did not ultimately wind up in the general obligation bonds. A lot of the equipment that we have out at Wildcat is 47 years old. MCC asset is 47 years old and at the end of its asset life. So this equipment really doesn't meet the safety requirements, and is another point of failure for Wildcat. and that project's budgeted at $2.4 million. I'm skimming through these really fast, not touching on many of the details. Two other projects in the general obligation bond at Rio were the generators, or a generator for Rio. So Rio was originally constructed as a scalping plant, so we just skim off the water and send the solids down to Wildcat. And originally, Wildcat could handle the capacity that Rio treats. But that's no longer the case. We can't send water from Rio down to Wildcat. Wildcat just doesn't have the capacity. So in essence, it functions as an end of line plant, and therefore the need to have that plant run 24 hours a day. And Wildcat relies on that 24-hour operation. So the general obligation bond has approved the, or was approved with the generator at Rio. The other one is the turbo blowers at Rio. We did have blowers installed in 2017. I don't know what happened back then, but the blowers that were installed were too big for, or provided too much air. And we run the blowers at their lowest setting, at their least efficient setting. And it's still too much air. So there's a need to replace those blowers. Again, this was a GeoBond funded project. Reclaimed water. This is short, not as long as water and wastewater. Let's see. I'm just looking through my list here. I'll touch on most of these projects briefly. I just have the one slide for reclaim. The primary project that we have listed in our budget is the bottleneck. It eliminates an 8-inch line that goes from the tank at Buffalo Park down to around 4th Street and Lockett. And that project is currently in design. We're actually adding some design elements to that to include some fiber. This is a significant fiber route that the city has identified, so we're trying to include that in this project. One of the new items that we added to the reclaim budget was a reclaim recharge outfall project. This is something that Aaron Young has sought grant funding for, and we just wanted to make sure that that funding was identified in the capital plan should we be successful in getting those grants. In that project, I circled the area that we're considering for that in green. So this is the Lone Tree area just south of the Sawmill District in that area. And then finally, another new item is advanced water treatment, sampling, testing, and pilot project. You'll see that as a couple different line items on the 5-year plan. So advanced water treatment, we're recognizing as a potential need in the future due to regulations. It could potentially be a water resource for us in the future. And in order to prepare us for those eventualities, we need to start testing our water on a more regular basis to see what treatment processes are going to work best. So we've budgeted $60,000 over the next 3 years to do some of that testing so that we are prepared for that pilot project. And the pilot project is specifically listed because what we see at the state level in terms of regulation is before you implement advanced water treatment, whether it's for direct potable reuse or otherwise, you're going to need to do some level of piloting within your systems before you implement at a full scale. So that's what the pilot project is separate from that. And then finally, we have stormwater. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on stormwater.
But I just have
Oh.
one question relative to the discussion we just had around budgets. I was trying, no, go forward on stormwater. What scenario was this, if any? Did it relate to baseline, middle, top, or is this separate? I was struggling to make the numbers match up. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. And I believe this is the scenario 1, kind of the base budget. Yeah. The majority of the projects listed here are a result of the general obligation bond. And actually, the projects I have listed here are just the projects that were identified as, hey, we've already funded those or we've already committed to those. So everyone's very familiar with the recent fire and flood events. This is a slide from last year that I just left in there for reference sake, but I think everybody's familiar with the history. So the fires from 2019, we affected Spruce Wash. I wanted to just list the projects that we have or are working towards this year. We've got the Linda Vista Culvert, Cedar Avenue Culvert upsizing, the Killup Inlet, and the Spruce Wash channel improvements in Grandview, which I mentioned earlier. On the left-hand side, you'll see a picture of, I wanted to just give some accolades for a project that we completed this last year at Dortha. And so on the left-hand side, you can see, some flooding at Dortha prior to the improvements we made, and then the functioning new Dortha crossing that you see on the right-hand side. And then the picture in the upper right-hand corner is Linda Vista, which again, we're looking at upsizing as part of all of the infrastructure improvements in that drainage. For the Schultz Creek wash, again, I don't think Water Commission had the benefit of seeing the Schultz Creek detention basins as part of the capital plan last year. That happened very quickly, but I wanted to give a shout out to the team that worked on that and got that completed. I think most of you are familiar with it. Another project that, this was the one, Ed. I was talking to Ed earlier about this today, and I said, there's a project we're missing. The Schultz Creek Channel Stabilization. So this has, what does EWP stand for? Emergency Watershed Protection Funding. And we did get approved for that. Okay, so there you go. It should be funded in the near future. And that project, that stabilization happens between these other two projects I've listed, the detention basins and the Schultz Creek and 180 crossing. It's somewhere on the museum property in that area is where that stabilization project will happen. And then finally, the Schultz Creek and Highway 180 crossing. This is the scenario that we're currently moving forward with. Which is roughly a $4.4 million project. I think most people are familiar with the issues at that crossing. If you're not, happy to answer questions on that.
Just a quick question. Are you going with the, going by the back of Calvary? That option?
The option that goes through the church property, yes. And then finally, the Rio de Flag flood control project. This is a carryover slide from last year. We have $16 million set aside. You saw it in Ed's presentation, and that'll be debt funded through our rates. And I think that's my last slide. I tried to get through that as quick as I could.
So to piggyback on another topic that's coming up later, I found in the deck, we had tables for each of the divisions, I'll say, or product lines. And we've been talking about setting up a dashboard for 23. And one of the things that was asked or suggested, hey, wait, because we're going to show you all the projects. And so I went through and I kind of picked my top 15 and send them to Brad, but I'd urge the other commissioners to go through that, what was in the deck, pick the 15 projects you think you want to make sure we've got a red, yellow, green on for planning, execution, and funding. And we can submit that to Brad and the team and see if that makes sense. Along with a couple other operational things like Red Gap Ranch and where are we at with regulatory there, and there's some other things, but I think that's a good way to start this initiative to just, pick 15 and then we'll look at the ones that are most commonly picked and morph those together, right? And we can go from there and circulate that back to everybody. But I can send you all the note I sent to Brad, but yeah, so.
My apologies, I did mean to mention that
No,
because
it's all good.
Marion will be asking for that information or giving you an overview of what we were working towards at the end of the meeting. So yeah, please provide me with, or Brad with, what your top priorities are in terms of what you want regular updates on. Be happy to provide it.
So could you review where each of these areas are funded from, just really quick? Like I know reclaimed water comes from, I believe, the sale of reclaimed water. And stormwater, you're doing a rate study for that. Where does funding come from the other, for the other two?
Yeah, so there's two primary sources when it comes to water and wastewater. We've got our normal water and sewer rates that we charge customers. And then two, you have capacity fees for new development. And so those funds go towards increasing the capacity of our system, whether that's upsizing water or sewer lines, or whether that's increasing capacity at our treatment plants or wells, or Red Gap Ranch is another example. So those are the two main sources for water and wastewater. And you're right, reclaim comes from our rates as well. Reclaim rates, yes, specifically.
I guess this is the public comment period on the presentation.
Yes, please.
Is that correct?
Because this
Yeah,
is.
my name
on-
is Robert.
Because this is on the agenda, so yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, thank you. My name is Robert Devane, and I'm a resident of Flagstaff. And what I wanted to address just briefly, in a period of scarce funds, I think the commission should certainly look carefully at all of these items. I'd like to pick out four that I think deserve your questions and some additional investigation. The first is in the 5-year plan for drinking water. And in that 5-year plan, there are 3 line items related to Red Gap Ranch, totaling $850,000, so not insignificant. I'm curious what this actually represents. Red Gap Ranch has been discussed a lot, but however, we do not have the results of the 10-year or 15-year or however long it's been Jacobs engineering study. And so I think it's fair to question, what is the intent that's embedded in this 5-year plan for Red Gap Ranch? Are we moving forward with it? Are we moving forward with it as a regional source of water, or just what does $850,000 represent? Moving on to the others, my other comments have to do with the reclaimed water list. The first line item is the 8-inch bottleneck, totaling $3.9 million, which is the second biggest line item on the whole page. Being an engineer myself, I fully understand the desire to get rid of bottlenecks. However, in the years that I've been involved in discussing water with water services, I literally have not yet heard of any customer who's complaining that they are underserved and complaining about a lack of water. So again, in a period of scarce funds, I wonder why we keep pushing on this for $3.9 million. Second, the reclaimed recharge outfall project, which is the single biggest line item on the page, the $6.35 million total. I guess the question is, this is, to my understanding, not really a supported program yet. It has been discussed with council and they gave the go-ahead to seek a grant for it. But my understanding is that grant is not moving forward at this stage. And I think it needs to be discussed whether this is something that you want to put in front of council at this point without further definition and further public discussion. The third one is actually one that I think may be too light. Line item 11 under reclaimed water, the AWT sampling and testing. There we have 3 years in a row of $60,000, but we show that that ends. And if that was to support the AWT pilot project, you know, my understanding is that you would want to continue that testing to evaluate the results of the AWT pilot plant. So unless that $60,000 or unless that $60,000 per year is wrapped up within the $2.5 million, I think we should consider actually extending um, the testing line item there. So those are the ones that jumped out to me as ones that deserve further discussion and perhaps questioning. And I hope you will ask for more detail. Thank you. Is that my 3 minutes? Thank you. Came out perfectly.
Any other thoughts or comments? Well, might I just make a suggestion here, which is we still need to get to interbasin. Is it okay if we come back to you via email with some of the feedback on that? In terms of the questions that were just posed, because we can get some comments and suggestions and circulate answers back on email. Is that acceptable? Yeah, that's what, Rob. Can we come back to you on email with answers on that? Yeah. No, understood. It'll go in the minutes as a public, announcement, but yeah. Okay. Because this next topic is pretty important, as they all are.
All right. So the next item on the agenda. All right. Um, it- I I am listed as the presenter for this, but I've actually asked David Peterson and Stacy Breckler-Nags to provide the presentation on this project. This is the Interbasin Waterline Road project. This was damaged during our monsoon season as a result of the fires, and I'll let them introduce themselves and carry on with the presentation.
So hi, Water Commission, Stacy Brecken-Eggs. I'm the City of Flagstaff Grants, Contracts, and Emergency Management Director. Been here for a long time, know some of you. So we gave this to council a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and it was about a 45-minute conversation. So we will do our best to get through this. I don't know if 15 minutes is going to be enough, but we'll talk fast and we'll get through it if you want to keep going. Sound good? All right. So cue her up. Um, I'll let David and Brian introduce themselves. We have quite a team. There's only 3 of us today, but there is a large team behind us, all the way from Forest Service to our Jacobs Engineering, and Hunter Contracting was our design build engineers. Funders and project funders are behind us. They're not here, but big team on this project. And I worked on it in 2010 after the Schultz fire with Brad Buddy. That was a heck of a project when we first did this project. So let me have the guys introduce themselves, and David can pull up the PowerPoint.
David Peterson, Capital Improvement Project Manager. Happy to be here, Commission. And yeah, my section of the presentation was about 25 minutes, so I'll do my best to shrink it down too. I try to not be as verbose.
Good evening, Commission. Brian Hunsinger, Water Production Manager.
All right.
Just
So
real
we'll
quick,
see if
I
we
think
can.
To your question about
Yes.
time, I think, if we could address a couple, make sure we hit a couple big things, which is what is the production impact? This, I think it's 20%.
Yeah, so
Are we going to get funding to fix this?
we're going to get funding.
And what
That's
do you
the
think
very last
timeline
slide.
is to fix this? Those are at least to me, those are the big 3.
Yeah, and so let's do this. If you want to really condense, I can, I'm actually going to skip my slides. I'm just going to pop through these real quick. Sound good? You know a little bit about the water line. You've got the history. That's what a lot of this was that I spent a lot of time talking a little bit with the council with the past history. Of course, talk to you about the Schultz fire and when that pipeline was broke in 28 locations. We now had the pipeline fire, which was 26,000 acres, which damaged the water line again in different locations and in the same locations. David will show you a map of that in those locations. Here's some photos of what happened in 2010 when that damage was done. We ended up going back and doing a direct select with the design build contractor that did the work in 2010, Jacobs Engineering. So that's a benefit to us because we have the record of engineer on board. He did a lot of this encapsulating the water line. A lot of it worked. So that's great news. And then you can see the damage on the right-hand side on the pipeline fire and some of the gabion baskets that still held up but were damaged. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian. That was quick.
Thank you. But excellent.
Very quick. Here's just a couple pictures of our buildings in the inner basin. If you're familiar, our inner basin cabins, some flow or weir buildings. Like Stacy breezed through, it's our first major water supply from the late 1800s. I'm talking about springs now. Spring flows highly snowpack dependent, variable. Since it gravity feeds off the mountain, it's our hands down most inexpensive or least expensive water source. Current summertime peak flows I've seen as high as 2 million gallons per day. That represents about 20% of the city's summer peak consumption at about 10 million gallons. Also, for about the first half century or so, the city of Flagstaff depended on interbasin springs and those found in around Flagstaff. It really wasn't until the 40s we got surface water from Upper Lake Mary. In the 50s we started groundwater wells. Back to the cost, some of Flagstaff's local wells are drilled 2,500 feet. So in comparison, spring water is absolutely the cheapest source. Interbasin wells were added in the 60s and 70s. We have 3 of the wells. If you're familiar with the interbasin, each has a capacity 300 to 700 gallons per minute each. Also highly adjustable, variable. We can set the flow of each well to whatever we want within that 300 to 700 gallons per minute. Combined capacity of all 3, 2 to 3 million gallons per day, also representing about 20% city's peak consumption in summertime months. All 3 wells are off-grid or diesel powered. We use this diesel tanker truck you see in the lower right to deliver diesel to the wells. Depending on how many wells we're running and what flow, that can be as frequent as weekly. So it's one of the main reasons we require or need waterline road is for the diesel tanker truck. Both spring and well water find their way to our North Reservoir filtration plant. You see here the North Reservoir filtration plant treats both spring and well water, has a design capacity of 4 million gallons per day. A couple years ago, we implemented water production or a backup power plan for water production. The North Res plant is not only a source, but it's also a booster station. For these reasons, we outfitted it with backup power capabilities. With gravity fed springs, diesel powered wells, and a treatment plant with diesel power generator. It's one of just a handful of water production sources that we could use if there's a catastrophic power loss scenario to the city. When interbasin spring water is insufficient flow or poor quality, we divert the water to one of these vintage exposed reservoirs. The one on the right or the eastern one no longer holds water. The one on the west, however, still holds about 20 million gallons. It's been used extensively for wildland firefighting for all major wildland fires in the last couple decades. Here's a picture of a helicopter dip from the museum fire in 2019. In the pipeline fire, as many as 120 helicopter dips per day were made. Also in the upper right, you can see a hose lay that we made during the pipeline fire directly off of one of our wells to support firefighting in the inner basin. And that was a brief summary of what the springs and wells represent today. I'll turn it over to David.
Although I would also point out that if you turn to the council meeting on the 10th of January, that this full presentation is available on that as well. This had Forest Service staff, Nick Musto, the Deputy District Ranger, that went over this, but this is just going over some of the processes that the Forest Service has to complete as part of a permitting to allow the project to take place. These are some of the project stakeholders. As you can see here, the Forest Service has been instrumental in allowing us permit and escorts this summer and fall to get up there to get a lot of the drone imagery that you'll see in this presentation, as well as some of the survey data that we collected for the well sites up high. Arizona DEMA and Hunter Contracting and Jacobs Engineering are the design build team, as Stacy previously mentioned. And we have a myriad of city staff as well as county personnel on the team as well. So GMP 1 was approved by council this week, actually on Tuesday. So that was with Hunter Contracting to get us through the 30% design. Part of fragmenting that design into 2 GMPs is that we really need to get up there in ground truth. And now that we have a resident snowpack for the season, that is impossible to do, especially with LiDAR acquisitions as well. So we'll be waiting for GMP 2 to do that, which will be a continuation probably in beginning of May. We'll come forth with City Council again with GMP 2. This last Tuesday, they did approve the contract as well as GMP 1. So it'll just be the consequential GMPs that will be brought forth for that. So GMP 2 will finalize that design and that will go through this fall. The thought is, I'm going to skip to the next slide here, that the work could hopefully start in late summer to repair at least the water line. So we can get some of that water down and back into our infrastructure and then kind of push off some of that road repair work to a little bit later in the project. So just do what we need to as we go forth to repair the road to be able to get to the pipeline, as you'll see in some of the pictures coming up. I'm going to skip over, but there is an inspection services contract as part of this as well, as there was last time, to make sure that we're just using, materials and it's installed in a way that's copacetic with our engineering standards. This map has a lot of detail on it. There was the Schultz fire remediation work that was previously mentioned, is sites 1 through 28. We wanted to leave that original numbering system on there. So we had to go alphanumeric. So if you look up high here, we've done A through L. And then there's actually some impacted sites between existing sites on Schultz. So we had to go like 24A, B, C, et cetera, as well as 29 through 35 now down on Schultz Creek below the Waterline Road as well. So our extent is above and below the existing damage from the Schultz fire. The kind of charcoal is the burn scar area from the pipeline fire, and the kind of purple blue coloration is the Schultz fire Schultz fire burn area. And this is just for reference, the Schultz Creek watershed here in blue. So the elevational range here is about 7,600 feet up to 9,500 feet up at point A. So it's a very, ecologically diverse area, which is good and bad. It allows construction to happen at different times of the year. But obviously to get in there at 9,500 feet, especially this year, great to see the snowpack, but it will be there well into May, I'm sure. And then I just have a little project tour. So we have about 45 to 50 sites. So I've used throughout the presentation 45 plus. We just don't know because we haven't ground truthed it since the monsoon ended. But I'm just going to say 45 sites plus. I'm going to share 10 in this presentation just to go progressively from very minimal impact to the worst impacted sites. So point 4A and point A here on this screen, you can see a little bit of sedimentation on the road, a couple of little rills. Point A is the highest one, just below the wells. This is the site that's at about 9,400 feet. This one is in size, about a couple feet in depth and in breadth. So pretty minimal impact, but obviously it needs to be improved to have vehicular traffic over it. Interestingly enough, this site's about half a mile from anything that burned. So this is draining the backside of Fremont Peak, the backside of Doyle Peak. All that drainage comes through this channel. As you can see here, we have the well casings that were previously used for Schultz work. There was timbers that were orthogonal to these ones here, burned up in the pipeline fire. Great resource to have on hand, but wood burns. So we are able to hopefully instrument some of the city projects that we have to potentially reuse guardrail that we are likely we'd have to recycle otherwise, as well as potential fill if we need it up there as well. But again, just in sizing here, sedimentation on the road, a little more debris downhill. Here you can see some of the structures that were part of the Schultz remediation work and restoration work. These were designed for the Schultz fire. They were not designed for the pipeline fire, but they held up remarkably well given the fact that, the flows were much higher given the impact of additional burn scar. This one's really interesting. This rock here, for scale, this gabion step here is about 3 feet. So this rock is about 9 feet tall and about 12 feet long. It's the size of a large SUV, and ironically looks like a Flintstone SUV. But note between these two pictures here is these large and small sized, car-sized rocks came tumbling down. They've impacted and cratered the gabion faces. So we do have to do some improvements and repair to some of these gabions, as well as recalculate and redesign them and repair them for what has happened up there with the pipeline. You can see some incision and head cutting here above and below the road, as well as in some places here, the third of the road is missing. Keep in mind the water line is approximately under the center line of the road. So at the time of these pictures in the beginning of September 7th, the water line wasn't exposed, but it's likely that the water line could be showing and potentially broken in some of these places too. But keep that in mind as you see some of these pictures. This one is interesting. We thought the road actually went down towards the bottom left of this picture, but it attenuates back into the forest here. Again, very large sedimentation and scour, but our concrete capped structure is pretty well intact. Again, more of the road missing here at 0.9. And then the last two slides here are 0.32. So this is on Schultz Creek. As you can see on the map here, it's a little further to the south. Since this picture was taken, that water line is now broken. So this is one of the two known places that the water line is broken. This is the CMP that was going under Schultz Pass Road. So it usually has about 5 feet of cover. Here's the water line again here below this picture that's here on the left. Obviously impassable from the city side from the south. Last point I. I'm in the yellow circle for reference. That's about a 30-foot incised canyon. This is where the water line is broken, and I want to point out that the water coming out of this is just that surface water or spring box collected water. When we knew the infrastructure was compromised, the wells were shut off. So it's not well water being dumped down. Really nice to have a nice natural creek coming off the peaks, but we really need the drinking water. So just wanted to point out that that water coming out, where that's origins from, obviously this road might need to be rerouted depending on what the engineers say. The uphill side of this is wilderness boundary. So we can't do any mitigation work uphill of the road. It will need to be done below the road. Just adding to the complexities of the project, but things we can overcome with our great stakeholders. One quick thing I get from a lot of people that know that we've done missions up there is what does Waterline Road look like? From A to G on the map, it looks like the Waterline Road that we love and adore. So on the left is during one of our summer missions, and then we went up there the second week of October to do the surveys of the wells up there to get a baseline data there. So that section of the road is still intact, looks great. Also just wanted to bring a little sliver of hope here that the aspen regeneration up there is looking really good. We had some aspen that are already 30 inches tall. These pictures here on the top three here are by point I, and this one is about point H. So you can see a lot of that bouncing back with some great resiliency. And then I just love the fact that pictures say 1,000 words. There's a lot of what's called biological legacies. So typically wildfires don't burn an entire landscape. They leave little pockets of green vegetation, which act as seed sources. So you can see there's pockets of spruce fir, there's bristlecone pine higher up. But I love this picture because it shows the heart of the aspen stands still intact. And it's not uncommon for aspen stands to act like an asbestos fence when you have a wildfire coming through. And this shows, pockets of those aspen still standing there, withstanding the pipeline, which came through with amazing wind, as we all know. And with that, I'll turn it back to Stacy for funding.
That was fastest presentation I've done for a while. So to your last question, funding. So a couple things. This is a state we declared after the pipeline fire and the flooding, the post flooding. We had 3 separate declarations, and that's just based on the timing of the flooding and the times that is set up between rainstorm events. So there's 3 declarations. This event will cover all those declarations. The Department of Emergency Management and Military Affairs, DEMA, will pay $75.25. And so that's in place now that we have available for funding. But what I am working with our emergency manager at the county is to work with the House bill post-fire flooding with the Department of Forestry and Fire Management to get this funded 100%. I have a letter in to them. I've got a revised letter that they are just asking for us for a little bit more detail on some cost estimates on each of those GMPs. And I will resubmit a revised letter with that to get DFFM funding for 100% for post-fire flooding. And we did have a grant into hazard mitigation to see if we could get them to help fund also some long-term hazards. And right now they're putting that on hold and not interested in funding it because they're really waiting to see if DFFM funding would come into play. And that's all state funding anyway. So we think we'll pretty much have this 100% funded. If not, it would be 25% matched to the city. And I hope that answers your question. Sorry for the scratchy voice. I've been working the incident management team since Sunday with the winter storm, so I'm a little tired, but feel great, but just run down. I need a weekend of sleep. So thank you.
That was awesome. Thank you. Quick one. With the 2 million gallons, sounds like we're not going to get that for a while. What strain does that put on the rest of the system?
Yeah,
And,
Brian
yeah,
can
are
probably
we-
answer
people
that.
gonna be
And I
thirsty this
appreciate the
summer?
question though, because why we were able to get to this emergency procurement and go direct select was for the health and safety of our residents to get this water back online because it is our peak summer flow. So I'll let Brian answer that.
We're fortunate to have redundant water supplies in Flagstaff. We did not use any of the interbasin water because of the pipeline fire this last summer or the summer before. So we'll rely more heavily on other sources, our groundwater supplies, surface water from Upper Lake Mary.
Thank you.
Brian, how does Lake Mary look right now?
We've come up about 3%. We thought it was higher, but we had a broken transducer where we get our level from. We're currently repairing that transducer, so we don't have live reads, but it does look like we've already come up about 3%, so we're sitting at about 24. We ended last year with the lake at about 21%. We're looking pretty good though. This snowpack should. We'll see. Maybe it'll overflow.
All right.
Any other questions for me?
Thank you. I mean, obviously this is critical for the city. So thank you for all the effort. I mean, this is incredible work that's got to happen
Yeah,
fast.
one of the other things that Brian didn't mention about why we do have redundant supplies, those are more expensive. When you say groundwater, meaning that's power, this is cheap water.
Yep.
So there's a fiscal impact to the division having to switch off of this supply.
Gravity's your friend. Um, Thank you. So that was item 4D. In terms of old business, I think, Brad, we've sort of touched on it. We'll send an email to everybody and
Yeah, the only
Right.
thing I was gonna say is there's just one thing that we can, we're in the process, Marion's in the process of putting together, not only what we're talking about is a agenda item for the whole year. So
Yeah.
next
which is right here,
exactly.
which is fantastic.
Yeah, and that's just the
because
beginning of it.
Right.
There'll be a
this
lot more.
Allows us all to get ahead of the curve and, yeah. And just to or from, Ben is going to be joining the regional, right? Did you agree to that one yet? The Regional Planning Committee, which is excellent. And then,
And then, Mr. Chair, we do have a brief one from staff. Did you
Oh,
want to
great.
say about water legislation? Just a quick heads up.
okay.
Real quick, Erin Young, Water Resources Manager. There's some legislation that actually Don Bills brought up to you in an email,
Right.
and we'd like a quick opportunity to just update you all on that because it's fast moving, but it's really important. Just briefly, there's no groundwater regulation outside of the active management areas. So Phoenix, Tucson, Prescott, and we desperately need some management of groundwater levels before they plummet beyond repair. So anyway, Don, if you want to bring that up real quick, the new.
Yeah, sure. There were two items that I wanted to bring to the commissioners for their interest in case they weren't already aware. One of those is the governor has developed an executive order number 4 to create a water policy council And the primary intent of the Policy Council is to modernize the 1980 Groundwater Management Act. So they will be looking at all components of the Management Act, including how the active management areas, irrigation non-expansion areas operate, and some of the rules that related to those components of the act that may be outdated need to be improved upon. The council is going to be appointed by the governor, but it's going to have a fairly broad representation. And in the email that I sent to Marion and the council, I put the source reference material, and there's a pretty good explanation of the Water Policy Council at the governor's webpage if you want to take a look at that. The other item is something that I've been working on with another group. What we call ourselves is kind of like a rural groundwater working, been active for several years now, and it's an outgrowth of the previous governor's water innovation, conservation, and I forget the rest of the acronym. But anyway, it was one of the subcommittees suffered from a lot of conflict over groundwater issues in rural parts of the state. But one of the things that it did lead to was a number of bills submitted to the legislature. They were called rural management area bills submitted to the House. Problem is, they never got heard in the House. So the working group has been trying to work on the language of those bills and to reinvent the bill and resubmit it this year as the local groundwater stewardship areas. And there's some potential for that legislation to be actually moving forward in the legislature this coming year. It actually has a sponsor in the House, and there's, since one of the things that the Water Policy Council is being charged with is evaluating, in addition to modernizing the 1980 Groundwater Management Act, evaluating and maybe incorporating into an outgrowth of that new components that would pertain specifically to rural groundwater management of the state. So just, it's kind of an FYI sort of thing, and something that the council members should be aware of.
So, Aaron, who in the city or the department would charge at the state level to make sure that, you know, our concerns are being taken care of, considered?
That lands on me through our Northern Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. That's one avenue. The group that Don mentioned, this rural groundwater group, which is just a conglomerate of whoever wants to be part of it. Our Vice Mayor Aslan is on that group. I've been participating. Councilmember Bills has been participating. And these things move quickly when it comes to asking a city like Flagstaff if we want to support this or remain neutral or oppose it. We want to give you guys an opportunity to weigh in, but so far the bill hasn't been dropped yet, so we can't review it. And what we'll do on our next council agenda, or I'm sorry, commission agenda in February, is we'll put a placeholder for possible actions that we might ask of you on this item, or maybe some other legislative items. That way you have an opportunity to inform city council when we go to them on the same issues.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good point. The House bill was supposed to have dropped today, but I haven't heard yet whether or not that's happened or not. Maybe another couple days, who knows?
Excellent.
There is an opportunity on February 16th to visit the Capitol and lobby on this item. I think Vice Mayor is interested in attending, so if you're interested, just let me know. We'll see if we can make that happen. 16th? I
And-
can send out information.
John, you touched briefly on the new Forest Service policy. Did you want to give 2 seconds on that, or you want to punt till next month? Okay, okay. And I think finally, we want to say, Brad, thank you so much for your support, because you're not going to make next month's meeting from what you said. And I think we're all in your debt, and you've been so helpful to us and the department during your time as interim chair or interim um, manager. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. My contract to city is actually through the end of February, but I'm going to be on a cruise to the Caribbean, so don't shed a
So,
tear
wait,
when you
wait,
meet
wait,
next
wait, wait.
time.
So
That's the reason
Zoom,
why I
Zoom
won't
is
be here.
possible, and I know for a fact that those ships have internet connection because we provide it. So, okay. Zoom. Yeah, we're gonna see you via Zoom, so,
But thank you for those kind words.
Okay.
Yes.
yeah. I'd say speech, but I know you want to go, so, that's right. So we'll adjourn the meeting at 6:14, and thank you, everybody. And again, thank you to the department and everybody that's put together